Welcome everyone again. It's Expansion Draft Day. It's Flyover Footy, and we have another special guest, Charles Boehm. Is it Boehm or Boehm? I forgot to ask.
Boehm, rhymes with poem.
Boehm, my mistake. Thanks for doing this, man. Last minute was like, hey, I got 2 hours. Can you do something in the next 2 hours? You said yes. Here we are.
Happy to jump on. St. Louis is all in the MLS spotlight right now, so
Yeah.
we've all got St. Louis on the brain, I think.
Yeah, and I saw you were going to be involved. You'll be talking on KMOX later today, right?
Yeah,
Which
we're
is
right
awesome.
after the draft.
Perfect. I'm glad they're bringing in such good talent, to be honest. I was a little worried about it here in St. Louis, so that's a good start for them. That's great.
Hey, keep on going. Keep right on going. The check's in the mail.
Yeah, exactly. I read your article today. One more event of flattery here. Loved it. It was really cool stories. My MLS history is not the best, and so as I read these, they were all new to me for the most part. And I thought to bring you on to talk about a few of them. I thought we'd maybe start with the Joe Willis story. I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, this is a sort of a uniquely and deeply, I mean, maybe not entirely uniquely, but very deeply MLS-y and sort of ritual that has, dates back to 1998 or thereabouts. I think the Chicago Fire and Miami Fusion did this, and it's sort of shrank and evolved, and now there's a whole bunch of different ways that club, sort of CSOs and other club decision makers can use it. But it has persisted, and I think part of that is the sort of the new clubs don't want to give this sort of lever that they have up, but it's definitely sort of you get a reflection of where MLS is at in terms of how rosters are built and how teams go about building their identities and their in addition to their squads.
Yeah, and in your article, and as you're kind of saying here, it does seem like a bit of a odd soccer, old school MLS kind of a move that they haven't let go of, perhaps. But you do outline in some ways how it's been useful in the past, for sure. I don't know how you feel about it personally.
Well, it is like I said, it's one of those quirky things that obviously it's an American sports, professional sports concept that MLS brought in, and if MLS is being founded today, would it exist? I don't know, maybe not, but expansion as a concept has been such a huge part of the identity and the existence of modern MLS. And we hear talk about it pausing after 30. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. I have a feeling that we'll be doing some more expansion drafts after Vegas or San Diego or whoever else comes after St. Louis. But I think there's not many opportunities that a newcomer gets to sort of you could use a few different words here: terrorize, steal from, pilfer, haggle with, hold up for ransom their fellow, their fellow MLS clubs, and so that's very interesting. In a lot of cases, as I wrote, this just becomes sort of just another allocation money sort of asset juggling exercise where you sort of get a chance to maybe in the olden days when there was 10 picks per team, you would actually build a significant amount of your roster out, right? And especially for those who consider MLS experience to be a key part of a roster and a locker room environment. But then there's also the chance to sort of take your pick of different teams around the league and then also flip those assets. So as you were talking about Joe Willis, you could imagine, this is a little bit of speculation here, but if, Nashville is looking around trying to find, their goalkeeper or their top competitors in their goalkeeper core who are going to be backstopping their inaugural season, and they can look at someone like Willis and maybe they don't see a path to getting a deal done in a one-to-one trade with his team, which at the time was Houston Dynamo. But they can sort of, they took Zarek Valentin from Portland in the draft and then flipped him to Houston for Joe Willis. And so you have these opportunities to sort of wheel and deal, and it gets a little riverboat gambler-ish, which is a lot of it's happening behind the scenes and we don't see the fullness of it until later, but it's still pretty kind of fun and interesting. And you can learn a little about the personality of your CSOs, guys like Lutz, Fun, and Steel.
Yeah, that's so funny, like the riverboat gambling thing, and like they've only had like a day to do this. I heard that Lutz just got this list only a little bit before us, if at all. I don't know. Like, it's really crazy to have to kind of make these massive decisions and scout that many players all in basically one day, and then make these, club defining decisions in some ways.
And what I can tell you, what I've heard over the past few days, and it's not unusual for this process, is he and his staff are in charge. They're in touch with everybody, probably even before they got the list, because they always want to have a jump on things. They know that it's sort of like having a twin blanket on a queen size bed, right? Every team has, even the teams that are really homegrown heavy, which is sort of the best insurance against getting pilfered in the draft. Is homegrowns don't have to be protected; they're automatically protected. But even those clubs have more assets or players that they want to keep off of this list than they're able to. But then you have there's the right the 5 picks that you have, and then there's the threat of those 5 picks, right? So we've already seen these international roster slot deals that are happening where teams are giving up international slots at a discount in exchange for what we can be almost certain are handshake agreements behind the scenes to not pick players from that team. And then you're also looking at, there may be some players that they want, that they expect to be in their lineup or competing for a spot in their lineup on opening day of 2023. And you want to try and go get those as well. But sometimes there's more value in the threat than in the reality.
I love that. Yeah, a lot of fun with the a lot of fun with the storylines, and that's what's so great about your article. I think we'll move on, but I hope everyone will check out that article. This one is on MLS.com or MLSsoccer.com, and everyone should check that out. You write for a lot of different people, but that is on their website for this one. But I am curious, you mentioned MLS experience. Some people value that for this draft, and some people don't. We've got 3 international slots. There could be more coming or not. I thought this would be all about domestics here coming up in the next several weeks, but the internationals have piled up and are seemingly continuing to pile up, or the potential for them are. So I don't know what you think St. Louis might be doing and what you think about their build so far.
So, and I think they are wise to stockpile those. At some point, if you don't need them, you can always, you can flip them for assets pretty easily, because there's almost always someone who's looking for one. And sometimes certain deals, transfer deals can't happen until that happens, until you get a slot lined up. I'm intrigued. It's somewhat but not entirely unique that St. Louis has had a dry run in the form of the MLS Next Pro team. So the 2 team, I'm a big fan. Like, so over the years, the early years of expansion, there was a pronounced advantage, and conventional wisdom was that the teams coming up from a lower division had an advantage because you had, existing culture, infrastructure, organizational news, and all those sorts of things. And then when entities like Atlanta came in, the conventional wisdom sort of shifted a little bit, and people got this idea that you didn't have to do that. And in some cases, like Minnesota had a hard enough time that people thought there was actually a disadvantage from having to sort of, portage yourself over from NASL or USL or whatever to MLS. I still think there's no substitute for getting guys on the field, getting guys in your crest out there, even in a, what we would say is 3rd division level, to try things out and see what's working, what isn't, and see what your chemistry mix is like. So I think that's going to prove, in my view, really, really invaluable for Fonenstiel and company, because you've gotten punched in the face on at least some sort of minimum level, and then you can already start to apply those lessons for 23. That being said, it's not MLS, right? So there'll still be, I think, a steep learning curve next year. But I'm intrigued by what they're doing. I think there's certainly, you can see the ethos on and off the field, the types of players they've brought over. You see Fonenstiel's sort of network at work here. You do need some guys who have been there, though, and who are going to know the opposition and know the daily routine and the grind of MLS and the stadiums you go to and the places you play and what goes into that, right? So, even in the case we look over at the U.S. men's national team, right? Even with this 8 years later from the last World Cup and with this drastic generational cultural shift, they're still bringing DeAndre Yedlin, yet and sort of maybe one more right back than they really need to, if you look at that roster, because he's been there and he's done that. And I think that there's still some value to that. And I think that will be the case for St. Louis City as well.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode in itself, talking about what MLS brings to the table. I think that would be a fun one for the future. But we got to focus in here. I like that punch to the face idea, that this, at least you get your punch to the face, some of it at least, maybe a lighter punch to the face in MLS Next Pro in this case. And you list some bad examples of how it hasn't worked in the past, but I don't know if Nashville has gotten enough credit for, they didn't go all out with bringing those guys up, but they really did pick and choose some players to bring up to the MLS side, and I thought they did a really good job of that, and really looking over available players for this expansion draft. I thought Nashville's list of guys was really impressive. A lot of domestics that are useful, and some of them were available to be picked today.
Yeah, so I in the months, I guess it was fall of 2019, I actually went to Nashville and got to sit around a table with a bunch of their sort of brain trusts. They had this sort of decision making by committee with a number of different people from different sort of walks of the game that they had gathered to provide their sort of this kind of council approach. And it was interesting because you saw a little bit of their Sporting KC DNA with some of the guys that come from there, and there were a couple of other influencers. And I think what they did was, and maybe you contrast it to Atlanta or LAFC, the floor was raised, I think, for them by virtue of the identity of the team, the philosophical and tactical identity of being an organized defensive team that was tough to break down, and value, looking for guys who are underrated elsewhere, undervalued, and not necessarily swinging for the fences and trying to go out and be, the greatest show on turf from the jump, which some teams can hit that, and some teams have sort of hit that, or at least done a reasonable job of it, and others have not, right? I mean, New York City FC year one was kind of a case study in mistakes and things not working out in that way. So, but I think now, if you look now, we're 3 years on in the Nashville MLS cycle, and you see the limitations too, right? That raised ceiling or that raised floor also maybe impose a ceiling on them that they're having to sort of navigate now and figure out how much further can this identity take us, right? But certainly for a team that was launching in a somewhat unproven market, I think there was a lot of value to that. So I would say, I think it seems like St. Louis is a little bit more towards the Nashville flavor, that end of the spectrum. But I don't want to sound like I'm damning with faint praise here, because I think there's a lot of other interesting things that are going on. But certainly the investment, there's a lot of faith being put in the sort of Central European dudes, right? And again, I think that will put a higher floor maybe than some of the other expansion teams that have really struggled, but it's gonna be fun to watch.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of good stuff there. And even like Nashville, as far as like pulling guys up that are underappreciated, perhaps. I saw I think 2 center backs that came from USL 1 that look like they have a lot of potential. They're young guys. So I'm really excited to see how that model plays out in the future. But, at the end of your article, I thought we'd talk one last part about the expansion draft here, that we may see 1 or 2 guys traded away. We may see all of the guys traded away that are picked today. And man, the more people I talk to, the more I'm hearing that the trading away guys that we pick might be the feature of tonight's draft. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I heard from a source who said that St. Louis City have been really working the phones, hitting up every club. And remember, on paper, the 5 teams that lost players in the Austin expansion draft are off the table for this event, right? They can't lose players, but I still think they could be involved because they're in these, maybe you may see a 2 or 3 way sort of kind of deal with the transactions, but St. Louis is, from what I hear, working the phones, asking how much it's worth to expose clubs to not lose their players, so that you can kind of have fun thinking about those conversations. I hope that Lutz gives us a little tease or a little window into that process after all is said and done tonight. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if every pick has already been made for some days now, and they've got that all sort of predetermined, because technically you can't do trades during the process of the draft itself, but most definitely there's all kinds of stuff that's, I think, been set up now, and then they'll be ready follow through on that, or maybe zig and zag here and there if teams, give them something they can't offer them something they can't refuse. So it's a quirky little deal. Although I will say I wish that we had a 2-team expansion draft here, because it's a lot more fun that way when you have a little bit of the oppositional element of things, because that introduces a different set of impulses.
How American of you to say that. So maybe the alternative title for the expansion draft today is Luch Pfannenstiel, is that a threat or a promise? I love that there's a lot of calling and maybe threat making and trying to get more, squeeze every ounce of GAM out of everybody around the league. That's fun. I got 2 more fun ones. Now
and I would point out too, like they've done a lot of deals, right? Especially internationally. So maybe allocation money, which is the coin of the realm, but maybe at this point they're not as hot for that, right? Maybe they feel like they have other priorities and how they want to do things. Maybe they're looking at roster spots 15 to 24, what have you, or even are thinking about what the 2-team interaction with the first team is going to be next year. So I don't know exactly where they are in that process, but I definitely know that there are starting caliber players up for grabs tonight.
It was better. The list was much better than I expected for some reason. So it is going to be exciting no matter what. You've been around. I respect your opinion. I love how balanced and level-headed your opinions are. That's my favorite thing about when you post something on Twitter when everyone's been freaking out. So I am curious. The Berkey deal is something that people are really talking about being perhaps a mistake, spending that much on a goalkeeper. Alternatively, you could argue that if you add up what everyone's been worth that he's been getting on a free, that could balance it out. Yes or no, I'm not sure. But overall, the build of the St. Louis roster, in your opinion, what are some of your thoughts?
So that particular deal, I think, is if you were to go back a couple of years, it was very much at one point a very established wisdom that it was dumb to allocate serious resources, both acquisition costs and salary costs, on a goalkeeper, because there's proportionally more of those available in the U.S. And you could point to someone like Brad Stuver as an example, right? I wrote about him at length in the playoffs. This guy who was a backup for like 8 years at a couple different clubs finally gets his chance around age 30, and turns out he's an elite MLS goalkeeper, right? So, but it's much easier to say those stories, afterwards, right? After the fact. Sorry about my noisy alley sounds here, but so I think it's a little that was once sort of established conventional wisdom. I don't know that's the same anymore, just because there's more diversity in perspectives and backgrounds of decision makers nowadays. The league is so much bigger and more diverse in multiple different contexts. I'm sure that this isn't just as much about personality as performance. They feel like they needed to have certain types of leaders, guys who'd been there, done that, who could command a broad swath of respect across a locker room. So I would be almost certain, not having heard too much of the firsthand beta about their decision there, but it's for sure goalkeepers are perceived to be an area of strength in the domestic player pool. And then to look bigger, I'm really intrigued with the Red Bull influence, and in general, just the what seems to be a pretty clear, cant towards a high pressing system. But within that, there's so many different flavors, right? Even with MLS, you can look at the teams that are perceived to be pressing teams, and they do things in subtly different ways. So is Bradley Carnell going to bring over a lot of Red Bull ideas whole hog, or do we see a sort of a customized version of things? And there's so many different things that factor into that. Climate, travel, all those things mean, right? St. Louis has an advantage in the sense that you'll have Red Bull teams, for example, tend to drop off in the summertime, right? It's hard to keep up pressing intensity in the hottest months of the year. St. Louis is in a temperate zone where you're going to have cold at both ends of the season, and then it's still heat, but how much, how influential is the sort of Midwestern heat? Sporting Kansas City, your nearest club there, always travel the fewest amount of miles in MLS, which is a significant sort of psychosocial influence on the sort of the balance of the campaign. So if you look at what Vancouver travels and Miami versus what St. Louis is going to travel, all you can really get deep into the weeds with these kind of factors. And so I think a pressing system, you have more influence or more to consider there, I think, than most.
Interesting. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how that finishes up. I just want to ask you one last thing before you go. I love your national team writing as well. So I'm curious, we just saw Ream was a bit of a surprise ad right at the end there. Josh Sargent, not so much with the form he's been in, but I'm curious how you felt about those announcements and perhaps what we'll see their roles look like. Sargent especially, I'm curious what you think his role will be in the World Cup coming up.
I'm not pandering when I say it. Doesn't it just feel right that there's some St. Louis boys, some St. Louis flavor, the ancient cradle of American soccer is going to be well repped in Qatar, which I think there's something satisfying about that. But in the bigger picture, they earned it. I mean, absolutely. And, those are guys I would definitely not necessarily have seen either one of those guys as locks just a few months or even weeks ago. For me, Sargent is the best option to start at the number 9 role. When you look at all the different factors, we talk about this position. We've talked about this position endlessly for a year and a half or more now. And I think Greg Berhalter, for better and for worse, he is a thinker and he's an overthinker. And I think you see a little bit of that in this final squad that he picked, although I think he got a lot right, more right than I thought he would in sort of my perspectives on it. But when you're looking at sort of all around skill set, form, chemistry, I mean, to me, Sargent should be the guy. I don't know that he will be, but I think that's your starter against Wales, all things being equal. And then Ream is just a fantastic story. And I was actually lucky enough to be invited on the podcast that he does, which I think is moving over to Sirius XM.
Oh, nice.
But he's just like a good dude, considering what a big level he's played at for so long, and for him to have put together a career year at just the right moment and storm onto the plane sort of the last moment and maybe even be starting. I mean, I think there's a lot of good reasons to start that guy on day one. I don't know that he will, but it's just a fantastic story, and I think they need a presence like him, and he'll be useful for sure.
I think I can tell we listen to the same people. I see you in the same forums that I go on. So I agree with you 100%, and I'm more biased to agree with you. But on Sargent, that was dead on Ream. It feels like if someone bombs out of that second center back role, that Ream has a chance at that point. And if it's, trying to break down a defense, Ream is a good choice. If it's to defend out, maybe not such a good choice, but I'm just glad he's there. And I do agree that he deserves it.
And my guess is that they'll get heavy into the game planning for individual opponents. Wales is going to. I spent a bunch of time looking at them this week. They are, they don't need the ball, and they're not necessarily going to press you high, but they are going to try and counter. So the question is, I think it's going to come down to foot speed versus tactical discipline and decision making. Ream is, less strong in the former and more strong in the latter.
Yeah.
And then relationships, I think it's a huge advantage for Aaron Long that he's been in. He was in that fitness camp down in Texas, working on a day-to-day basis alongside Zimmerman in front of Greg Berhalter. Inevitably, coaches in his position are going to be probably carrying a significant recency bias. So again, if I was a better, I'd probably say it's Long Zimmerman on day one, but I do think we'll see Ream on the pitch.
Cool. I'd love to see it. Charles, thanks so much for talking to me. Again, KMOX tonight. Make sure you check out his Twitter for all his stories. CBOEHM on Twitter. Charles, man, have a good time tonight. Hope you enjoy it.
Phil, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for having me.
You too, man.